Hello everyone, it's been a while. Sorry I have not done videos for a while. Not that I guess I don't get many views, but look, in this particular one, I'm going to talk about possible words and place names that were borrowed from foreign languages by foreigners coming over pre-British. It's only speculation, and I've got a few good ones. But anyway, so in this particular video, I do have to pay respects to the First Nations people and any places that I'll be referencing with due respect, full respect, as I'm only speculating on some language borrowings. So I do pay my respects, and now from here I'll go on with the topic. So I'm going to be covering quite a few parts of Australia, mainly the East Coast and Tasmania. So and I'm going to try to talk about place names, some language borrowings, and just show some maps and what I think it could be. All right, so Sydney is an interesting one. I speculate that there were some pre French, Phoenician, Jewish people probably arriving some hundreds of years ago. It's just a guess. And I'm seeing some language speculation. These are only speculations. I'm not too sure. I went through John Hunter's historical account of the adventures in Port Jackson. I'll show that a bit later. There's a few interesting things there. I also next I want to talk about the name Parramatta and Toongabbie and Cabramatta. I just want to show them on the map. So this is Sydney. Some of you obviously know the place names I'm talking about. Quite a few of you will, but for those that don't, the this is Botany Bay where they apparently first stopped the initial first fleet, and then they went to Port Jackson here, and then they'd sailed up and established Sydney Cove, which is here, and uh, and then made most of their effort around Parramatta, the Parramatta River here. And Toongabbie is just up here, and there's a place called Blacktown. So Parramatta means place of eels, and I've always thought it sounded a bit pigeon. So para is a common thing to say in Latin languages. Para for means for or pertaining to. And mater can mean a wooded mater can relate to wood or timber or forest or bush or death or killing. So it but the way it sounds is that the original First Fleet did set up barracks here and they did set up a perimeter. So I had an idea that someone said it could mean perimeter, but I don't. What I think is that these are all heavily speculated, and I'm sort of don't think I can go anywhere with it. I have tried to find the etymology of Parramatta from a foreign way, but I can't really get it. Toongabbie is here. It's one of it's the third settlement that according to the official narrative. So they started at Sydney Cove, they went to Parramatta, then they went to Toongabbie and via Toongabbie Creek, which you can see up here. I tried to look for the etymology of that as if it came from Africa potentially. Sometimes it's spelled Tongabe or Tongabis as if Ton meaning town and Gabi could be reference to a black or someone indigenous, but I've tried for days to try to work it out. There is another Tungabi down in Victoria as well, but I can't really get any with it. So moving along, the other one that I think is probably of most interest in the Sydney part is Cabramatta. Cabra could also be pronounced Cobra. In the initial narrative, Cabramatta means like the place of a worm or a river worm or something like that. Uh, Particularly, it's very close to Cobra. And what we do is we see all this Portuguese pigeon referencing. I keep seeing this kind of hint of some kind of Gaelic influence or Latin Gaelic, you could say. Let's call it Portuguese, Galician, Galician sort of influence. This is what I'm speculating. If you go to a map, I want to take you to a map. This is a map that I've done on a different video that goes to about 18, the 18, whatever it is. There's a couple of them. One's from 1798. One's a reissue around. I think this is the 1798 one. Anyway, I can't be sure. I can't keep track of all the things. But anyway, this is a map going back to the first settlements, and it has all the land petitions. If I zoom in, you'll see Cabramatta here. You'll see Toongabbie pronounced with two E's in this case. You'll see the old road, which is Old Windsor Road, and then the new road, New Windsor Road. I've said this in a previous video. If you've only been in the country for 10, 12 years, or whatever it is, I don't know how you could have a road called an old road already established as an old road. It makes no sense. I mean, there can't be any old roads really, unless, anyway, it's just. But Cabramatta's right out here, right towards the, I would say, not as far as in the Nepean River, but South Creek, between South Creek and here. And so I think that the official narrative about the origin of the name is probably potentially wrong. Cabra could also refer to goats. So, something to think about. Yeah, a few other points that I just wanted to mention. Um, One is Bondi, which is Bondi Beach. I've had someone on the so I had someone on the group chat say, I think his name's David Line, saying that Bondi means good day in French or Italian. Does Bondi does mean good day in Italian. I don't think that sticks. I don't like to have too much complexity in trying to find out the derivation of borrowed languages, so I think that's a bit strange. Another thing that I like to point out to people is that the name Hurst, which is Anglo-Saxon reference to a wooded hill, Hurst goes back to Old English times, and hardly any place names in England are called Hurst. There's a few, but we have such a prevalence here in New South Wales of the Hurst name. Petersham, I always wonder about Petersham because of all the stories of the Rum Rebellion and the various factions fighting each other, you don't really get enough information about how early settlers set up their freeholdings. But Petersham comes up strongly on the map, and the actual official local histories of Petersham goes right back to the beginning. So you'll see a lot of very old photos from the 1850s that are fully developed suburb. You seem to get a feel that it's an older than average suburb. So I'm always peculiar about the official narrative of that and how much it takes up so much space here, yet it does eventually contract down to a common suburb in the inner west of Sydney. Just something that if people are interested in local history, I'd probably focus on Petersham and who actually was the original landholder owners and who acquired the original holdings and of whom. There might be clues there to potentially um, undocumented land holdings prior to the official British recordings, but I'm not sure. It's Picton. I've gone through in previous videos about Picton. Picton is way out here. It's interesting because right out here in the cow pastures, which is near here somewhere, was where we had all the mysterious 5,000, 10,000 head of cattle that mysteriously popped out after being after escaping from a boat from a drunken sailor and then making it out all the way here. Picton obviously means the town of Pix, but it is named after someone called Picton. The normal history is obviously still mysterious. There was, I think, what I heard that there was cattle holdings out here. There was small sheds, undocumented things that made no sense. A rich family came and bought it all out, and then made serfs of all the other sublet landowners to get rents as a gentry. So there was a gentry that came out here and made it into some kind of mini feudal thing. Okay, so just want to also reiterate with languages is that all of the Sydney did develop a pidgin language called the Port Jackson Pidgin language. It came into existence only a short period, maybe 10 or 15 years after the inception of the first fleet. So that's rapid pidgin development. So I know pidgin languages do form because of people, having to connect with different languages, people who speak Dutch or people who speak, from South Africa or whatever that happened and the melding of various slaves and of course the indigenous. But just want to note that a pidgin language did happen to develop extremely rapidly, which is a bit unusual. I've mentioned this before. A lot of people have said that perhaps in the around the Hawkesbury River, and the Gosford waters and that sort of thing, around here that that was probably how uh, independent farmers probably came in and brought their cattle around Richmond and Riverston. I suspect that they would have continued to have concealed farms all the way up to a place called Singleton. Now, Singleton's called Singleton. It was originally called Patrick, and the land surveyor called it Patrick. Now, we know that the Irish were held in contempt at the time. I don't know why a land surveyor would ever dare to call someone a place after something that could be implied to be Irish, unless there was Irish people already there. I had a friend of mine, I spoke to him about it, the alternative history theory, and he said, yeah, he came from Corindai, and he noted that it was a vibe around there that there were people that were before the initial narrative. You get this, you speak to people that aren't part of the community of alternative history, and they'll say, yeah, yeah, someone told me about something that's before, and like, and then they can't, you can't hone down on the actual thing. So, well, what is it then? What are you talking about? So there is a vibe that there's something going on, and I would say that this all ties into a broader issue. I've looked at areas around Port Stephens, and I've considered that to be a pre-British port, and they would have been keen to get there because they would have had an easy run through some of this land here and to get all the way across to possibly where the gold was. It was might have been pre-British gold mining, even if it was moderate. Um, and the reason why I say that is there's a couple more place names that make that a bit out of place. One is Sofala, which is named after Mozambique port, which was famous in the Middle Ages for being where King Solomon acquired his gold. It's one of the ports that was involved in the King Solomon gold empire. And of course, we have Ophir, which is the actual gold where people mined from gold and from the 1850s, and they called it Ophir, naming it after the King Solomon gold biblically, but it could actually have already been called Ophir, and this could already have been called Sofala. I'm not sure, or they, there was already some pre-British mining, albeit moderate, and they would have had to go and take it over all this land here to get it to whatever boats and ports they would have tried to set up before the British, even though they might have been humble. And you get all these, and across all this land here, you get some pretty interesting old sites. Nunes has a lot of history to it. And there's a lot of people on the alternative history channels that always look at this sort of northern area with old roads and convict roads that make no sense and that sort of thing. So I'll sort of mention that. Another one that I'm curious about is Tarauga. Tarauga just has a strange name to it. I don't know. It's just sort of mentioned. It's a very old town. It's a lovely village, but the buildings are extremely old. And it's this diffusion of old buildings. You go to these towns, and all the first buildings are 1815 or 1810 or 1820 or whatever. And you look, and some of these towns are just so obscure. You wonder how they set up. Like you look at the dispersion and the proliferation of and the propagation of farming. I mean, how they got from across the whole New South Wales in 30 odd years or 40 years to settle most of it beats me. I don't know how you would have had the infrastructure to do it. But anyway, all right, so I want to talk about what's called the Judeo-French connection. During the 12th, 13th century in the southern part of France, the Radonite merchant empire was falling and was taken over by Genoan and Venetian shipping and banking cartels. And you had the Inquisition, of course, and so you had a great power transfer away from the sympathetic, probably more the good old world, the proto-Protestant and the Jewish Radhanite merchants would have been overtaken. They would have had a great dispersal. So the Angevin Empire would have gone. That's probably what is your old world empire, is the Angevin Empire that fell with the Albigensian fall in the mid 13th century. So you would have had a dispersal, and they would have gone as far as they could, and that's why I think they went to Eastern Australia, because they would have already had a bit of mining with some of these sultanates. They would have, sorry, had a bit of trade with some of the sultanates that was already active in Indonesia in the 13th, 14th century anyway. so it wouldn't have been much of a stretch to sail south. And that's what I think they did, and I'll go to why they did in a minute. So this is John Hunter's history, historical thing of Fort Jackson, Norfolk Island. It's quite, I think it's quite legitimate. I think it's got a lot of information in it. Okay, in his very own work, he notes a that the indigenous people, the Eora people in the Port Jackson area, did present them with a woman. She looked like a mulatto Jewess, so that's basically means she was brown, she was copper-colored, brown-skinned. That's very unusual. I mean, you can't pass that by. The other thing that you need to note, some of the languages are quite strange. The Eora people, um, they use their names as Leon, which is a typical French thing for lion. It's like it's kind of how you'd associate with it seems French, but Gal is my main interest, and Gal keeps coming up on and on as a very common name that signifies a tribe, and this is completely consistent with the Gaelic languages, which all include Portugal, which is the people of the port. Gaul itself, Gaelic, it all refers to the kin, the clan, the actual tribe and the kinship, and that's makes it distinct from like a Roman citizen population where all the outcasts get together and try to form a population, whereas a group is very family centric, and so the Gael thing keeps coming up quite a lot. I'll go through a map here. So the Gael clan, one of the most common Gael clans, done a list here, and one is they're mainly around the east coast. In fact, I think they're exclusively between Wollongong and Newcastle, the entire Gael group. So Garrigal, Gadigal, Terrigal, Camaragal, and Warrigal. And Warrigal, it's clearly like war Gael, that the people, the warring tribes, and that's exactly how they were described. Gadigal, David Lyon from a group from one of the chat groups has suggested that Gadigal means the tribe that followed the god Gad, which is a Phoenician god or a proto-Hebrew god. Then Terrigal could just mean people of the land, as in terra. And that's so I think that that's a very important distinction. That's quite a really big win, I thought, on that point. Carrying on from that, from the Jewish connection, I wanted to make note of a place called Mount Nebo Lookout. Now, according to the official history, it's just called Mount Nebo because it's from an Aboriginal word, but we do have two other Mount Nebos up north, which are named after the place where Moses last looked upon the promised land before dying. And it is like that. Mount Nebo is looking over the promised land. It is quite a brilliant vista. And so I suspect that Mount Nebo is consistent with the fact that there's a Warrigal tribe nearby. There's Gal that, and I'm going to go with the fact that that's Jewish, that's a Hebrew borrowing in this case. So moving along. So it's quite significant. If we go down to here, we'll find Mount Nebo, Mount Nebo Lookout. Now, according to the official history, it's just called Mount Nebo because it's from an Aboriginal word, but we do have two other Mount Nebos up north, which are named after the place where Moses last looked upon the promised land before dying. And it is like that. Mount Nebo is looking over the promised land. It is quite a brilliant vista. And so I suspect that Mount Nebo is consistent with the fact that there's a Warrigal tribe nearby. There's Gal that, and I'm going to go with the fact that that's that's a Hebrew borrowing. So another interesting thing that I got my attention caught on is the Jin-based place names. Jin, of course, is in here we start getting into the Arabic sort of aspects or the Middle Eastern aspects of where borrowings could be. So gin is like the jinn, the spirits, and that sort of thing. But that's not what it means in indigenous languages. Angelica was founded in mid 1800s, but there was cattle runs prior to that in the 1830s, probably even earlier. The first riverboats went through there, so it was in a bustling new development. Gingelic was one of the first ones, and it just sounds Irish to me. There is, in fact, a person in this world called Gingelic. So if you just separate Gingelic into Gin and Gelic, you get a person's name. That's what I originally thought, was that this could be just an Irish, settlement that was taken over. I'm not sure, but because then I kept looking at all these other gin names. If you look across Australia, they're all over the place. They do seem to be around here, around the southern New South Wales bit. And you've got Gingelic, Jindabyne, Gingera, very common names. I have sort of let that go. I don't think Gingelic is Irish anymore. What I'm thinking is that I went down, we're thinking about Melbourne again. I was trying to work out whether Mildura was, meant the milling of Durham flour, but there is no evidence that there was flour milled in Mildura, so I gave that up. Melbourne means mill by the river. I think that's established. That's okay. A few things in Lower New South Wales and Victoria. We all know about Boyd's Tower, which is a 15th century uh, Galician Portuguese watchtower. Just mysteriously decided that's what they wanted to build there for some reason. In the 1800s, the owner was so excited to build a Portuguese tower. I mean, why wouldn't you? I mean, why not? So for some reason that's there. And back on this map, it's roughly around where that circle is there to the right. This and Bega is also around there as well. So the significance of Bega is that if you look at the word Bega, it's in southern New South Wales. I do think it relates to the Ben Boyd Tower in the sense that Bega probably means berg, and is a common word that you would use for a town or a village. Norumbega, I'll get to Norham now, but Norumbega means the city of gold. It's a legendary city that was supposed to be in Newfoundland or somewhere, and currently there's a Viking city or something like that. It was full of gold, and all the sailors would talk about it. So what I did on this map, and I showed in a previous video, that the distance from a specific monument in one of the parks in Bega, if you take a measurement by Google Earth directly to the opening a monument at the opening of the Yarra River, and you take that distance, and then you go from that point all the way to the left where it says two, where Warrnambool, where a Portuguese ship apparently was stuck on the beach, and you go to that exact dimension there, and then you halve that. That's exactly half that. So that distance is say 4. That distance is half that at 2. Then if you do an exact right angle and you go out half again, you get to a location which is a lake where all the local gold mines run as a confluence into the lake. And so you've got this. So this is almost like a star map where like it's cosmology, where you actually where everything aligns so closely to the city of gold, which is basically just a lake where you basically pan for gold. So it's kind of a joke upon a joke, and so it's an interesting tie together. Going back to Port Phillip, I just want to talk about the actual port. It was originally Port Phillip itself was originally referred to as Narm, but I've seen it spelt as like it's Neram or Nerm. This is the map from 1839. And here we've got Nurm, which could be, Nurm, I don't know. But that's where I get the Nuremberger idea from. It's highly speculative. But you go over here and you see all these names. This is from 1839, but you've got names and you've got settlements and you've got farms everywhere. So it's quite amazing how far they expanded in a period of 4 years. But anyway, it seems a little bit fast. Melbourne spelt without an E. Here's the main interesting thing. If you look here, it says protectorate accompanying Western. So here's the word Western spelled Western, but the port is called Weston Port. Now, the apparently history of Western Port, which is that's Phillip Island, but what the history of Western Port is that Bass named it Western Port because it was west of the known port, which is Port Jackson, which is obviously east of Western Port. It was the westernmost port they had stopped on, so they called it Western Port because it was west by longitude. So, but I don't. But then why did they, in all their genius and being highly, high-ranking, cartographers and lieutenants and all that sort of stuff, how could they misspell the word Western here? It makes no sense. So I think it's called Weston Port. And then even if it's west, then what's the eastern port? I don't think it's Port Jackson. So going back to the map of Australia, right, it's quite clear, and this is quite an interesting part, is that here's Weston report port or Western Port Bay but what has been discovered and discussed is that sealers in the early 1800s were already active in Wilson's Promontory. This is called Corner Inlet, and there was a lot of oyster trading. You can see references to that in various there's an oyster empire that was talked about in the 1840s. So only a matter of a few years after the so-called foundation of Port Phillip, you had these thriving oyster trades that spent a huge amount of their effort going all the way from here in small boats all the way out to here. So that's a big effort to move goods that were obviously potentially going to go off in that period of time, but somehow they made it. So um, that's a bit sketchy, but then you've got what's called Port Albert. Port Albert is one of the oldest ports and possibly the oldest long continuous port in the 1840s. It's quite strange that but it was already there was already activity in what's called Corner Inlet prior to the 1840s, and then prior to that there were sealers all around here. So what I think is that we this was your eastern port. If there was an eastern port, it would have been this, and that would have been your western port. But then again, it was spelled Weston in the map. Melbourne was called Bear Brass, Bear Herp, or Bear Burp. I don't know how on earth, like I don't know what was going on there. But to me, that's supposed to be indigenous pidgin, and I just don't believe it. Tried to look at, spent days or something trying to find out where brass or Bear Brass, what it could mean. I keep thinking it goes back to Scottish Gaelic, and also looking at the Bruce or the Brass names. I've been going through the Herp of the coat of arms for like the Herp family. It goes to the Dalriada kingdoms, which was in north west Scotland. So Gaelic again, there's all these Gaelic connections that keeps coming up over and over again in some of these pidgin languages. I don't think that any of them are going to be correct. I've really tried to find out what it could be, and it seems like it's pidgin. It's a pidgin language. We don't know much about pidgin languages because pidgin languages are their own thing and it's their own culture. So trying to speculate. Oh yeah, yeah. I've spelled indigenous wrong. Spelling mistakes. Um, I I just don't. I just think it's indigenous. I just think it's pigeon. But is it pigeon Gaelic? Is it what is it? I don't know, but I don't think it's indigenous in this case. But what I do possibly think is that Bear Brass, Bear Herb. I think the closest, most likely thing is that Port Phillip was more skanky 200 years ago. There was a lot of kelp, and the kelp would have shone through Port Phillip, and it would have been a port bait with exposed kelp, which would have had quite a strong smell and quite a golden or brass look. And that's probably why what I think it ultimately means. It's the it's probably a pidgin or a dialect or a word that we don't know anymore that's been lost by some of the 1700s, early 1800s sealers with their own pidgin language referring to a port with exposed kelp. That's my guess. All right, so we've talked about West Don Port. We talked about Port Albert. We talked about that. Now, this is the one I really think is the big, not smoking gun, but this is the one in Melbourne. There's a place called Doutta Galla, and Doutta Galla once again is assumed to be indigenous. Here's an old map of Melbourne, and Doutta Galla is up to the left, top left. What I think it possibly means is Deuter. If you anyone knows anything about Latin languages, like Deuteronomy, it means second. Like Deuteronomy means the second law. Deuter means second. Gala obviously means gala, like a festival, or means Gallia or Galatia. It just basically refers to a village, a kin, or means Gaul, or means French people. So would Douta Gala mean Little France? Well, and what I do get on some of these chats, and we don't see them on many of the Facebook groups, but people do refer to potentially French groups being around about here, the and the French having some influence. So I think Douta Gala is probably a reference. Is probably a strong bet. Um, Dalrymple is okay. Dalrymple is this river here. Let me just change the map. Okay, so this whole area is Dalrymple, and it's a crooked river, the River Tamer. Oh, sorry if I might mispronounce it. And it goes to Launceston. Now, Launceston was founded apparently around 1804. I think it's earlier. Word Dalrymple means a flat field at the end of a crooked pool or river. Apparently, it's named after the botanist called Dalrymple. But if I go to earlier maps, this one that goes to 1801 apparently, you see Port of Dalrymple here, which happens to be a port at the end of a crooked river, and there's some flat land at the end of it. So how convenient is that? So I don't think it's named after the botanist. I think it was named by the locals potentially. Once again, Dalrymple is a northwestern Scottish name, a word, place name, and it's a toponym, meaning that it's named after the topography. So, and here you go, Port Western up the top, 1801. So everything's inconsistent. South Australia, we have Tanya, which is the indigenous name for the Adelaide area. It could be indigenous. I'm just questioning it. I'm just throwing it out there. Does it have Middle Eastern connections like Taran Point? Plus, so Tarn could mean Taran, it could mean land, it could be whatever Taran means. But Tanya does, if it's Tanya, it refers to a princess if it's in Middle Eastern languages. And I refer to Middle East because there's a lot of tribes that practice circumcision in the south in the Adelaide region. There's a few tribes that did circumcision. That could be independent, or it could be influenced by the Middle East people. The Ghana people pronounce Kaurna. It's pronounced Ghana, and Ghana is obviously refers to Ghan this, Ghan that, which is all Middle Eastern again. This is where obviously the Cameleers came in apparently the 1830s, though they could have already been there from early 1800s, 20, 30 years prior, because there's a huge camel population and the camel spreading of camels and cameleers is the history of that is a bit sketchy as well. Some things to think about. All right, that's it. That's all I wanted to go through. What I think is that I've gone through a bunch of place names and words. I haven't gone through everything. I haven't talked about like the Wadi, which is also Middle East, North Africa, and is used in Australian language a lot, which could pertain to water. There's a whole bunch of things, but I think in the main that the indigenous languages and the culture are truly indigenous. There's about 99.5% indigenous with hardly any borrowings. I didn't talk about the name for dog in the Aboriginal languages up in North Queensland, which is exactly the same as our name for dog. But that's a famous one, so I didn't bother talking about it. But I do think that the indigenous languages are completely have full integrity, and they are truly what they are. But the borrowings are very strange. I think most of the things I've talked about are so sketchy that I don't think I'm going to put my reputation to it, most of them. But I think Doutta Galla, Bear Brass, Bear Herp, Western Port, some of these things are um, probably borrowed. Gadigal, Warrigal, Gow, it could be borrowed. I do think that some French Jewish people did migrate from a diaspora from the Middle Ages out to Australia. I suspect that that's the case. I suspect that they knew of like some of the work by Rex Gilroy that found, sluice mining up in the north coast. So I suspect they would have known about it. There's are bits and pieces. There's etchings around the various rocks. So there's enough research to indicate that Portuguese Gaelic for the past 1,000 years have come to Australia because they wanted to get away from the existing powers, or they're washed off course. Um, so I'd like to know what your thoughts are, and thanks very much.